Good evening. Hope you are all doing well. Today we're learning Maseches Yevamos. We're at the bottom, or I should say halfway down on Gimel Amud Aleph, and we'll be learning the rest of Daf Gimel and as well Daf Daled Amud Aleph. A manageable blot, relatively. I don't have much to compare to, but as it relates to Yevamos, it's one that we could actually learn. And the Gemara actually. Sorry, is that rude? I do love Hashem very much. It's true. So. Can I tell you something? I didn't even know I said it until someone laughed. And then I'm like, what did I just say? Okay, so we're starting. I'll just put this one case up here that you can see. It's the case that we started with yesterday, where Reuven and Shimon are brothers. And what is this? What's the case here? That Shimon's daughter is Chana. Reuven has two wives, Chana and Penina. And Penina is the tzara. So our Mishnah has a very weird language that the tzaros are peturos, and that is where we are going to start with tonight. We're again a little bit more than halfway down on Gimel Amud Aleph. Says the Gemara, "Umay irya detana potros." Why would you say that the tzara, that in this case Penina, why would you say that she's petura? Litni osros. We should say that it's aser. Petura sounds like you can, and if you no big deal, but it's aser to be with her. She's a tzara. There's no yibum, no chalitza. You're not allowed to be with her. Why doesn't it say asuros? And says the Gemara, we can't, because itana osros. Had our Mishnah said that the tzara, that Penina in our case was osros, then hava mina aser liyabe maval michlatz chalza. We would have said that maybe we could distinguish and separate out the mitzvah of yibum and the mitzvah of chalitza, and we would say that maybe, okay, I understand that maybe it's aser to do yibum, but maybe she could do chalitza, and therefore kamash malan. Says the Gemara, that doesn't answer all the questions as to why we say potros. The litany, just say what you want to say. Asur lachlotz. If your concern was about chalitza, then just talk about the chalitza piece. Then just say asur lachlotz for the tzara. So says the Gemara, you can't really say asur and lachlos. It's not asur to do chalitza. After all, my kavid. What's asur about doing chalitza? It's not like yibum where you're going to be intimate with her. That's a whole different story. Chalitza, she takes off the shoe, she spits on the whole thing's over. What's the big deal? So says the Gemara, Alamalo, why are you saying that there's no halachic problem? Im omer choletzes. If we would have said she can do chalitza, we would have made an error and assumed that misya bemes, that maybe there's also yibum, and therefore we should have a stronger language. Either way, the Gemara says that really what's going on in our Mishnah, and the reason why we have this language of potros by the tzara, by Penina, is because kevan de b'makom mitzvah hu da asura tzara. The only time that Penina is aser to Shimon is when the other wife is Shimon's daughter, in which case there's an iser erva for him to marry his daughter, and therefore the tzara is going to be aser. However, the shelo b'makom mitzvah sharia, but it would be at times permissible to marry Penina. How could that be? Well, it could be that Reuven's two wives were two women that were not related to Shimon. It could have been Penina and Chana, a different Chana, Penina and another Chana Schwartzberg, a different one, not the one that's Shimon's daughter. And if that's true, then technically Yibum can apply to both of those wives, and therefore Mishum Hachi Tani Potros. So the reason why in our Mishnah it says that the tzaros are potros, why the second wife, the wife who's actually not related to Shimon, the reason why we say the language of potros is because sometimes it's mutter for Yibum to take place with a tzara and sometimes not. We didn't want to be categorical about it. The Gemara doesn't ask this question. Why didn't the Mishnah just say that? Just say, it depends. We've had Mishnahs that do that before. The Gemara doesn't discuss that. Umay area, why then does...
I'm sorry, I don't have that.
Sure. Which case? The one...
The case that, when
a tzara is allowed to be married?
Right. What's the difference?
So let's say that you have Reuven and Shimon, and Reuven is married to two women who are completely unrelated to his family. Completely unrelated, not related to him, not related to Shimon, and then Reuven dies. Shimon has a mitzvah of yibum with both of those women.
Right.
So that's a case of where there's a tzara, there's a second wife who's allowed to have yibum done. That's not the case that our Mishnah was dealing with. Our Mishnah was dealing with where the first wife of Reuven was Shimon's daughter, so Shimon cannot marry his daughter in yibum. So therefore, that's not allowed. Then the Gemara asks on our Mishnah, we had said a strange language that it was min ha-chalitza u min ha-yibum. Says the Gemara, umay irya, 10 lines from the bottom of Gimel Amud Aleph, umay irya detani min ha-chalitza min ha-yibum. Why does it say that? Listening min ha-yibum lechudei. We only should have said yibum. We know one applies to the other. Says the Gemara, it's not always so simple to assume that. Itana min ha-yibum, hava min ha-mechlatz chalza, yivum elo miyabma. I might have thought that if it only would have said yibum, so then I might have thought that maybe chalitza that chalitza is allowed and yibum is not allowed. Kamash malan. What do we learn from the fact that it says both chalitza and yibum? We learn the following principle: Kol ha'oleh leyibum oleh lechalitza. Anyone who's shaykh to the mitzvah of yibum is by definition shaykh to the mitzvah of chalitza, and as well the inverse: V'chol she'eino oleh leyibum. Someone who is not shaykh by the world of yibum, eino oleh lechalitza. He's also not shaykh to do chalitza. Says the Gemara, fine, I understand now you need to list both chalitza and yibum, but why did you list chalitza first? Says the Gemara, but listening mean hayibum mean chalitza. Say it in the right order. Even the Pesukim and Chumash that we saw yesterday, the pasuk speaks first about yibum, and then okay, if he forgives, and then they go to Ashara, they go to the Bezdin, fine. Say it the right way. So then the Gemara says, inami, another possibility is say mina chalitza lechuda, or only speak about chalitza, because there we would then be able to reverse engineer our understanding of yibum with no concerns. So says the Gemara, the reason why it says chalitza before yibum is because the author of our Mishnah is Abba Shaul. What does he hold? De Amar mitzvahs chalitza kodemes le mitzvahs yibum. The mitzvah of chalitza is actually preferred over the mitzvah of yibum. A little bit strange, because when you learn the Pesukim and Chumash, you would not have thought so. So now let's take a look at a scary Rashi about the mitzvah of yibum. Rashi is 2 lines from the bottom of the page. Dibur maskal Abba Shalhi, and what does it say? Beperak Achole, it's a parak later in the Gemara. We'll learn in this Masechta. Abba Shal Omer Hakonis Yevim to l'shum noi u'l'shum ishus. A man who marries his Yevama, so his brother's wife after his brother died, who marries his Yevama l'shum noi because she's beautiful, or l'shum ishus, or to be married for the wrong reasons. What does l'shum ishus mean? That requires some commentary. Ki'ilu pogea be'erva. It's as if you are involved with an erva, and listen to this: V'karov be'enai lios havlad mamzer. That is a very powerful, provocative language. Is that if a person is going into yibum for the wrong reasons, it is karov be'enai lios havlad mamzer. So therefore, Abba Shaul was of the opinion that chalitza is actually preferred over yibum, and therefore our Mishnah said chalitza before it says yibum. Tosfos here on the side, the last Tosfos says the mitzvahs chalitza kodemes, and just look at the last line. Aval ilo havatani ela chalitza lechuda lo hava mashma midi. I wouldn't have had anywhere to infer this idea from without saying both the words chalitza and yibum in the order of chalitza first and only yibum second. So this is a very, very important principle when it comes to yibum, is that yes, it is a mitzvah d'oraisa, and we still should pick the other counterpart of chalitza. So that's, I just heard a Maisa just now, Rabbi Michelle told me a crazy story. Crazy. Rabbi Rosen, Yodi Rosen told me the story. He said that there was a young couple, just got married. Nebuch story. They got in a car accident. The husband was life support, basically. He was alive, but he was going to die in the next few hours. And he had a brother who was in the gulag, like before the curtain. Again, he was in prison in just a crazy Maisa. He's in prison, but in theory, the halachos of yibum would apply. And because of zikas yibum, because of the tethered connection between the brother in the gulag and the wife who will now be subject to yibum, she can't get married until there's chalitza. She'd be trapped, but he's in the gulag. What should we do?
What's the gulag?
He's in prison in Russia. He's totally.
Not yesterday. It was
a long time ago. This is 40 years ago, whatever the case, a long time ago. So she's stuck. So what's the eitzah? So one eitzah is that they should get divorced, because if you get divorced, then there's no yibum. The problem was that you have to get the right document. It's on parchment, dayanim, very complicated. Didn't have time. So they went to Rabbi Yashiv and they said, Rabbi Yashiv, what should we do? He's about to die, and if he dies, she's going to be stuck bezikas yibum to the brother who's in prison, and he's in prison, and until there's chalitza, she's stuck. He said, "What's the big deal? I don't understand. Go get a family member of the guy in the gulag. Does he have any children?" They said, "Yeah. The guy who's in prison has a daughter." He said, "Givaldik. Go tell the daughter to go into that hospital room and have the husband marry her right now." So here's what happened. This guy who's in bed, he walks over. The girl comes inside. Hello, deathbed. He says, "Harad mekudeshes libi paron zukadas Moshe Yisrael." Hands her a pencil. They're married. She's the daughter of the guy in prison. That's our case of Shimon and Chana. Exempted her from yibum. It's crazy. It's an amazing story. It's mamish, the first Mishnah in Yevamos, halacha lemaisa. Rabbi Yashiv didn't even dig deep. It's just basic Mishnayos. Yeah, guys, please. I'm a ratzim. It's daf Beis Amud Aleph in Yevamos. It's like the easiest Mishnah in the whole Masechta. Crazy Maisa. So that's chalitza is more important than yibum. She got stuck. Great story. Anyways, our Mishnah picks up on yet another concern. Our Gemara does. If you look back at our Mishnah, you would see in the beginning of our Mishnah, it says that there's 15 Nashim who are Erva. And then on Bezim and Bez, toward the end of the Mishnah, it said a repeated line, Hare Elu Potros Tsarosein. It says the same line twice that they're going to be pater. So the Gemara says, Minyana Deresha, when we talk about these Ervas in the beginning, Limu'ute Mai, what are we excluding? You could have just said the Ervas without giving a framing about these are the women who are Potros Tsarosein. Why did you have to say that? Just write the cases. The fact that you said something means we're exempting something. And it also said it at the end. So Minyana Deseifa Limu'ute Mai. So what then is the case there that is being excluded from our Mishnah? This brings us to the top of Gimel Amud Beis. So the Gemara says on the top of Gimel Amud Beis, case number one that we are excluding from our Mishnah is the case of Lemeute Derav Uderav Asi. There are two cases, and we're going to learn in Rashi what those cases are. And if you need a visual, I drew them up here because I need the visuals for Yevamos. So what are the two cases of Rav and Ravasi? So take a look at Rashi. Rashi says, Dibra Hamaschel Derav Uderavasi. To Amar Rav. Rav says that Tsaras Sota Asura. If the second wife is the tzara of a sota, so wife number one is a sota, she was bistira, she was alone with a man to the point that we were concerned that she was mizaneh. So then the tzara sota, she'im zinsa ishto. If wife number one was mizaneh, she was an adulteress, vilo, and he had an isha acheres, that's the tsaras. That's the tzara sota, the other wife number two, who was not mizaneh, and he has an isha acheres umeis bilabanim, and then the husband dies shtein ptura. So that's this case over here, where shteim are going to be pater. It's called the case of the tzaras sota. What was the case of Ravasi? That's the second line of Rashi. The Ravasi Amar tzaras islandess asura. We have a case of an islandess. This is a case where a woman is not able to have children. And the Rashi says that the tzaras islandess, the wife who is able to have children, that she'im hayanasui ilonis v'isha acheres umeis b'lo banim shtein pturos. So these two cases, Rav and Ravasi are of the opinion that in the case of the tzaras sota and in the case of the tzaras islandess, that there is no yibum in those cases. That's what they hold. Our Mishnah doesn't accept those cases. Our Mishnah rejects those cases to say, no, those cases actually do require yibum. That's why they're excluded from our Mishnah. But Rav and Ravasi were of the opinion that they should be included in our Mishnah in that there is no yibum. That's what the Gemara says. Says the Gemara, okay, fine, but l'Ravu l'Ravasi l'me'ute mai. According to Rav and Ravasi, who hold that the cases of the tzaras sota and the tzaras islandess are cases where there are pturos from yibum, that's great, but then what then were the exclusions to our Mishnah? That's just more of the same in our Mishnah. What cases would there be yibum? So says the Gemara, it depends. We don't know if Rav and Ravasi agreed with each other. So the Gemara says two possibilities. If Rav agreed to Ravasi's case and Ravasi to Rav, so then what we would say is that there are two other cases where there would be yibum. One case where one wife was underage, she was younger than 12, and another case where the other wife, one case is where one wife was under 12 and the other was an adult. Another case where a husband divorces his wife, she marries another man, they get divorced, and then she comes back to this marriage again, machzir grushaso. So what? You can't do that. Right? It's true. It's not allowed. But if that happens, would there be yibum in such a case? Ilo, and if they don't agree with one another, if Rav and Ravasi don't agree, ilo svirlu dehadade, then what would happen? Then one would exclude the case of his friend who he doesn't agree with to say that there would be yibum in that case. So Ravasi, for example, who holds of the case of tzaras islandess, would disagree with the case of tzaras sota to say there would be yibum. And what would the other exclusion be? And we would then include as the second exclusion from our Mishnah, one of the cases, either the case where a husband had two wives, one who was under 12 and one over 12, or the case of tzaras machzir grushaso, where someone remarries someone who they divorced. So a little subtle, but what the Gemara is doing is saying, hey, we have this exclusionary language. It says, Hare elu, nashim, potro, sarosein, whatever the language is, we say it twice. Why do we say it twice? Each one's to exclude a case and a couple of iterations of how that can be. So then the Gemara asks a great question on Rav and Ravasi. See, Rav and Ravasi were of the opinion that their cases of tzaras sota and the case of tzaras islandess were cases where there was no yibum. So says the Gemara, l'Rav l'Ravasi, if that's true, listen inhu, then why doesn't it include it in our Mishnah? Our Mishnah was only cases where there was an exemption from from Yibum. That was how we started. The pasuk in Chumash says Yibum. The first Mishnah says, yeah, but not here, not there, and not here. But if Rav and Ravasi are right about the Tzara Sotan, about the Tzaras Islandness, why weren't they enlisted in our Mishnah as cases where there's no Yibum? So the Gemara says a very important principle. Because it doesn't check all the boxes. Our Mishnah's cases where Yibum is exempt applies where there's a tzara, and that the status of the tzara applies to the tzaras tzara. And that's not true in the cases of Rav and Ravasi, in the cases of Tzara Sota and Tzaras Islands. Minahani Mili, how do we know that this is true? How do we know that what is true? Thank you very much to Rashi. Halfway down the page, Rashi says, Minahani Mili de erva, v'tzarasa, v'tzaras l'olam pturos. Now we know that it's true because the Mishnah wrote it. What is our Marimakum? We're about to learn the next 30 lines or so, which is all one brisa. This brisa may well have been the precursor to our Mishnah. In fact, it seems quite implicit that way. You'll see kind of like the deeper thinking that will then lead straight into our Mishnah. Let's get started. Says the Gemara 9 lines down on Gimel Amabez Tanu Rabbanan. We know that these women will be exempt from Yibum, the woman herself, the erva, as well as the tzara, as well as the tzaras tzara, and so forth and so on. We know that because of the following pasuk: Isha elachosa lo sikach litzror. A woman and her sister should not be married to be tzuraros. They should not be married to be a wife who is a tzara, chana penina. They should not be married to the same person. Legalos ervasa, to reveal her erva, her nakedness, aleha, on her. Very important word as well, soon see. Bechayeha, in her life. Now, what does the word aleha mean? Aleha, why does the word Torah use that word? Ma Talmud Lomar? Well, lefisha ne'emar, because the Torah says Yevama yavo aleha, we might have thought that a person is obligated to marry his Yevama. Shomea ani afilu ba'achas mikol arayos amuras b'Torah kasum medaber. Maybe we would assume that it's true no matter what, no matter who the Yevama is. So in our classical case, Shimon has a daughter named Chana. Shimon's brother Ruvain marries Chana. Ruvain dies. Okay, it's not socially acceptable, but a father should, in theory, have married his daughter because the Torah says Yevama yavo aleha. So says the Gemara, here's why we don't say that. Ne'emar kan aleha, v'ne'emar lahalan aleha. We have the word aleha used in another place as well. Ma lahalan b'makom mitzvah. Just like in one place, it can only be used when it's b'makom mitzvah, and there's no mitzvah to marry a daughter, and it's in fact usher to marry a daughter. Afkan, so here in our case as well, b'makom mitzvah, v'amar rachmana lo sikach. And here the Torah says you're not allowed to marry this person. So we have to try and keep things halachically with halachic integrity, and the halachic integrity in a logical space, first and foremost, would have seemed like he should marry his daughter, but only because the Torah says the word aleha do we not think that that's the case. We'll come back to this at the bottom of the page with an absolutely crazy halachic havamina. We'll get there soon, third of the way down. Ve'einli elahi. I only know that the erva is the one who prevents the father from marrying his daughter, or who prevents Shimon from marrying any of those 15 relatives listed in the Mishnah. So Rasami 9, how do we know about all of the peninas? How do we know about all of the second wives who really are not halachically related to that person? In our case, where Ruvain had two wives, the daughter of Shimon and Penina, okay, but Penina is really not related to Shimon. So why can't he marry her? So says the Gemara, Tzarasami 9, how do we know that the second wife, who really isn't related to Shimon, how would we know that they can't get married? Talmud Lomar litzror, because the Torah says litzror. It should be that when there's a tzara, the tzara is included in the fact that Yibum cannot take place. So because the woman is who Ruvain is married to is one of the 15 arayos of Shimon, so not only can he not marry that woman because she's an arayos to him, but the tzara, because the Torah says litzror, the tzara is also included in the exemption where there is no yibum. So says the Gemara, ve'einli ela tzarasa. I only know about Penina. What about a case of tzaras tzarasa? What about Penina who remarries and then there's another wife to another brother in the family? What about that case? Says the Gemara, Talmud Lomar litzror, same word. How do you make a drasha from the same word twice in a row? Very simple. We're not making a drasha on a word. We're making a drasha on a letter, an extra resh. It should have been velo letzur. What is the word that we've been using? A tzara. Do you see two reshes there? No, the pasuk has two reshes to teach me that the tzara is also going to forever be excluded from yibum. Really, the pasuk only talks about a sister a sister who's possibly subject to Yibum, that his let's say Chana Penina were sisters, so Chana was married to one person. How do we know to exempt her as well? So says the Gemara, that's only Achos Isha. What about all the other 14 arayos that are listed in our Mishnah? Sha'ar arayos minayin. How do we know? So the Gemara says because there's a common denominator to all of the arayos. The Gemara says as follows. Amris, I'll tell you as follows. Ma Achos Isha. Just like the sister of the wife whose husband died. So let's say Shimon was married to Chana, and then he died, and then he dies, and then Reuven would have married in theory the other sister, but that's not allowed. So Shara Rayos, I don't know about everyone because Ma'achos Isha Miyuchedes, she's unique in what way? She's unique in that she's an erva. That if one were to have been intimate with this woman, a sister-in-law, if it was bezadon, if it was intentionally, the person would be chayav kares. Ve'al shigagaso chatas, and had it been done by accident, had they been intimate by accident, then it would be a chatas. Ve'asura liyavam, and we know that this woman is asura liyavam because it's achos isha. So then says the Gemara, therefore, I now know the other 14 arayos have the same parameters. What are they? Afkol, all cases of women who are begetter shehi erva, that they would have these consequences for intentionally being with them or accidentally, and therefore asur liyavam. That's how we know that that all of the other 14 ervas have a marimakum to forbid them from being part of yibum. I only know about them. How do we know with the other 14 ervos, with the other 14 arayos that Tzaros say in Minayin? How do we know that the Tzaros, we only know by Achos Isha, because the pasuk says litzror. But how do we know by the other 14? The word litzror is only in one place. So says the Gemara, here too, we're going to use the rules of common denominators. Amris, here's what I'll tell you. Ma achos isha miyuchedes, what's unique about a woman and her sister? Shehi erva v'chayav and azdona kares v'ashig gasachatas v'asur liabim vitzarasa asura. Just like we know that by achos isha, that when a man dies, that his brother cannot marry the sister-in-law. We know that that's true. And we know that Yibum is Asr in that case, not only for the Erva, but also for the Tzara. Afkol, all who check off the following boxes have the same rules. Anyone who is Shehi Erva, and then the Brisa says something so beautiful because it really flows perfectly into our Mishnah. Mikan amru chachamim. From here, the rabbis say, insert Mishnah number 1 of Maseches Yevamos. That's our Mishnah. This whole Mishnah, the Brisa that we just learned, is a perfect background to our Mishnah. It explains in fair detail how each level of our Mishnah was explained. First Achos Isha, then Sarah, then Sarah, and then we brought it back to all the other 14 ervas and Mikan Amru Chachamim, the language of our Mishnah. Now, the Gemara says that really there are other ervas. Yachol ani marbe af sheish arayos. There actually is a case where there would be another 6 cases of arayos. However, they're not cases of Yibum because all 6 of these arayos apply to both Reuven and Shimon. I drew this up somewhere. Hold on. Nope. I think I did. Here you go. So there's a case here of Sheish Arayos. Sorry if it's a little distant. I don't know if everyone can see it. But the case of Sheish Arayos is where there's a man named Yaakov, and he has Reuven and Shimon as children. Yaakov dies, and Rachel marries Yitzchak, and Yitzchak is married to Leah. Now, do we have a principle of tzara by a woman like Rachel, who certainly Reuven and Shimon cannot marry? It's knaf aviv. You're not allowed to marry the stepmother, Rachel. Both Reuven and Shimon have the same prohibition to her. Now, can Reuven marry Leah, who's the tzara of Rachel? It's not a Yibum Shaila. The question is, do we have tzara even by other cases of Isser? There's no Yibum Shaila over here because we're not talking about brothers marrying. We're asking about tzara. Is tzara also found outside of the parameters of Yibum? So that's what the Gemara wants to know. Do we say that over here? Let's go back in the Gemara. We're about 2/3 of the way down. Yachal ani marbe, shani marbe. Maybe I can also include the case of tzara. So the case of Av Sheish Arayos, there are 6 women that are common to 2 brothers who they're not allowed to have any Yibum with at all. And they're chamuros me'elu sheyutzarosei masuros. Would we say that there is a tzara to a regular case of erva where there's no Yibum? So it says the Gemara Amers, I'll tell you as follows. Ma achos ishto, just like the case of achos ishto, which was the pasuk we saw above. Miyuchedes, what's the uniqueness? Shehi erva v'chayav al zona kares v'al shigir gasachatas, where if one were to be intimate with his sister-in-law bezadon, they'd be chayiv kares, and by accident they'd be chayiv achatas. The efshar li nase la'achim, and in theory, there could have been marriage from the brothers in such a case, in theory. The asura liyabim, and we don't allow for yibum to take place. But tzarasa asura, with those parameters, we'd say the same thing. The only time that we would say that there is going to be a tzara is under certain circumstances. Af kol shi erva v'chayavan al zadona karis v'al gasachatas. Only in a case where the onesh of the erva would have been intentionally with kares and accidentally would be a chatas. The efshar li nase la'achim v'asura liyabam. Only when there are those parameters, that's when tzarasa is asura. However, in a non-yibum case, yatsa shesh arayos, there are the 6 common women to whom 2 brothers would be forbidden. They're chamuros me'ilu, hol de'i efshar li nase la'achim. The brothers cannot marry her. Tzaros sehen mutaros she'ein tzara ela me'ach. The case of a tzara can only apply. The case of a tzara only applies when there's yibum. Otherwise, there's no such thing. So then the Brisa concludes, as hara shamanu, you've given us all of the halachic warnings. We know what we're allowed to do approximately and not allowed to do. We still have another 100 blot to figure out the rest, 118, but who's counting? So that's what we know about the azhara. But onesh minayin, what about the punishments? Do we know what the punishment is for this isser? So it says the Gemara, Amar Kra. The Gemara says at the end of the pasuk, that doesn't quote the pasuk, the Gemara says that it's going to be kares. So we're talking about onesh kares. These are some serious halachos, and one should be quite careful if any of these halachos come up. And then the Gemara digs into a very important diuk. Taima de kasav rachmana aleha. What is the reason why a father doesn't marry his daughter in a case of yibum? So again, that's our classical case. That's the case on this printed sheet that I handed out yesterday. And the case we started with today, where Shimon's daughter is Chana, and Ruvain is married to Chana, and Ruvain dies, should Shimon marry his daughter? Taima, the only reason he doesn't was because of Rachmana Aleha. Halav hachi, without that one word, says the Gemara, Hava Amina, Achos Isha Miyabma, that a person should marry even someone who's an erva to him. Why would we have assumed that? My Taima, De Amrinan, Asi Aseh, V'doche Lo Sa'aseh. Gosh, unbelievable. It is so simple. Let's talk bris milah. Today, I got a question from a pediatric urologist, random question. By the way, Rabbi, I'm not Jewish. I don't know a lot of halacha. Why are you allowed to do a bris on Shabbos? So I literally had just finished chazering the bottom of this page. I'm like, well, let me tell you. I'll tell you exactly why. Because when you have a confluence of both a positive and negative commandment, the positive always wins. It has to be in the same moment. The parents were on speakerphone and they're like, oh, so if the baby falls out on Shabbos, can you drive to the bris? So I said, listen carefully. I said to the parents, you go, listen carefully. Remember the rule. The only time we can violate Shabbos for a bris is when the action of violations at the same moment of the mitzvah. But when I'm driving in a car before a bris, they're not overlapping. They're not simultaneous. They're subsequent. So no, of course not. And then I threw in just for fun. Also, if the baby's going to be driven to the bris, we also don't do the bris on Shabbos. That was just for fun because that's not aseh dochelos aseh. That's just like not shayach. But it sounded very similar, so I just put it in. So, anyways, that's the whole principle. The Gemara says, when you think in halachic terms, the pashtus should be that he should marry his daughter. That should be the pashtus. No different than tcheles and tzitzis. That's going to be the example of the Gemara because aseh is dochelos aseh. So simple, says the Gemara. Oh, hold on one second. When do we say the general rule of aseh dochelos aseh? That's only true los aseh greda when it's a regular lav. However, los aseh sheyesh bo kares midachi. When you're talking about a father-daughter marriage, which is an isser kares under other circumstances, do we still say aseh dochelos aseh in such a category? Not so simple. So the Gemara says, Visu and furthermore, lo sase greda, just the regular case, forget our case of kares just for the moment, the regular case of a lo sase, of a aseh and a lo sase, how do we know even that case? Minnalan dedachi. What are the mari mekomos that allow for a regular case of aseh, doche lo sase? Top of Daled Amud Aleph, the Gemara says, very simple, the pasuk says in Chumash, lo silbash shatnez, and a little bit later it says, gedilim ta'aselach. You're not allowed to wear shatnez, wool and linen. And then it says, go wear wool and linen. So because of the fact that these two psukim are smuchin, they're close to one another, therefore we can extract information from one part of the pasuk to another part of the pasuk. And even though the lo sil bashatnis has nothing to do with tzitzis, because the Torah juxtaposed these two psukim, so therefore we know that aseh is doche lo saseh, the mitzvah saseh is greater than the lo saseh. And the Ramban writes, the reason why aseh is doche lo saseh is because aseh is ahava and lo saseh is yira, and ahava always trumps yira. Very important Ramban, but not for now. Says the Gemara, wait a second. The Amar Rabbi Lazar, smuchin min Torah minayin. Who says that just because two psukim are next to one another, I've said plenty of sentences one after the other that no one should combine. So just because the pasuk wrote them that way in Chumash, therefore you can make a drasha deoraisa. It's a din deoraisa. You're doing that bris on Shabbos. You're wearing shatnez. It's an isser in the Torah. Who told you that smuchim count? Who told you that there's a mechanism of drasha called smuchim? Shene'emar, because, and this is important to ask this question, this is from Tehillim, Divrei Torah Divrei Kabbalah lo yalfinan. The Gemara doesn't deal with this. I'm just asking on my own. The pasuk says, "Smuchim la'ad la'olam asuim be'emes v'yashar." Things that are smuchim, they are forever, and they are honest, and they are straight. That's what the Gemara says. That's how we allow for smuchim. This requires some research. We don't have time. But how can you learn out a din deoraisa from a din derabbanan? Nevertheless, the Amar of Sheshes Amar Rabbi Elazar Mishum Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah Minayin liyavama shenafla lifnei mukashchin she'ein chos minosa. Let's say that it comes to Yibum. The Yevama sees her new Yavam to be. It's her brother-in-law, and he's a mukashchin. The man's covered in boils head to toe. Very, very unappealing character. Not exactly the picturesque, the white gown down the aisle type of marriage, right? So says the Gemara, how do we know she'ein chos minosa, that we don't muzzle her, quote unquote, we don't force her to marry this person? How do we know? Because we have another example of smuchim. Shene'emar, because the Torah says lo sachsom shor bedisho. Wow, totally out of left field. We do not put a muzzle on the animals. The samich le smuchim ki yesh v'achim yachta of the parsha and sefer dvarim. This is how we know besmuchim that a Yevama doesn't have to marry the brother-in-law if he's not such a good-looking guy. It's smuchim, it's a din deoraisa. Says the Gemara, the Amar of Yosef, afilu leman de lo darish smuchim be'alma. And even according to the one who holds that in general we don't learn smuchim, you're not allowed to learn anything from one pasuk next to its juxtaposed partner. It doesn't matter when it comes to Sefer Dvarim. Uve Mishnah Torah darish. Mishnah Torah is a reference to Sefer Dvarim because it's a Mishnah Torah. It repeats a lot of what happened in the previous parts of the Torah. Luchos Rishonos, Luchos Shnios, V'chula, a whole bunch of examples. So says the Gemara, even according to the opinion that says that we really don't hold of smuchim. So we have to figure out how we learn our Gemara about the tzitzis, because that's also in Dvarim actually. All of these are in Dvarim. So says the Gemara, even according to the one who says that we don't learn smuchim in general, it doesn't apply to Sefer Dvarim. Everyone agrees you learn it in Sefer Dvarim. Says the Gemara, who are we talking about? Right? The Mishnah Torah Darish. Rabbi Yehuda be'alma lo Darish. In general, Rabbi Yehuda was of the opinion that we do not rely on smuchim. We don't look at juxtaposed psukim to learn anything. However, even though he doesn't learn about that in general, he doesn't learn that way in general. Uve Mishnah Torah Darish. He does learn that way when it comes to Mishnah Torah, when it comes to Sefer Dvarim. How do we know that Rabbi Yehuda does not hold of smuchim in general? Because of the following brisa, the Tanya, third of the way down, Daled Amud Aleph. The brisa writes, Ben Azai Omer Ne'emar Mechashefa Lo Sechayeh, Ben Ne'emar Kol Shochevim Behema Mosimas. Two psukim that are next to one another. And says the Gemara in the name of Ben Azai, Samchu Inyan Zeh. These things are close to one another. Ma Shochevim Behema Beskila. One who violates the animal of being Shochevim in Behema, of bestiality, he is Chayev Skila. Af Machashefa Beskila. So what does Rabbi Yehuda say? We know what we're expecting him to say, that he doesn't rely on smuchim. Says the Gemara, that's not where we learn the din of skila from. You're right, it's skila, but we don't learn it from kol shochev and behema. Says the Gemara, Amalei Rabbi Yehuda, v'chi mibnei shesamchu inyan lo notzi zel skila. You just looked at the pasuk next to it. You're like, oh, that's also skila. So therefore, this is skila. That's not how we learn it out. It's not correct. You're right about the din, but you learn it from the wrong place. Says the Gemara, Ella, ovi bichlal mechashefim hayu. Really, the types of necromancy, of these very heebie-jeebie kind of things, of ovi idoni. So those things are bichlal mechashefa. They're all included in sorcery. So then velama yatsu. Why then did the Torah explicate those cases? Why were they brought out? Lahakish lahem, to compare something to them. Velomar lach as follows. Ma'ovi idoni beskila af mechashefa beskila. What do we see from Rabbi Yehuda? He didn't accept the fact that there was smuchim to learn out skila. He learned it from a totally different source. So we see that be'alma, that in general, outside of Sefer Dvarim, the Rabbi Yehuda is of the opinion that there are no smuchim. How do we know that in Sefer Dvarim he is going to hold of this, that he is going to hold of smuchim, that we can learn something from two psukim next to one another? It's not halfway down. No say Adam anusas avim umufutas aviv. It is permissible for a child to marry a woman who his father violated or who his father coerced to be with him. And as well, it's mutter for a father to be with a woman who was anusas beno mufutas beno. If a son violated a woman, the father is also allowed to marry that woman. What does Rabbi Yehuda say? No. Rabbi Yehuda oser be'anusas aviv umufutas aviv. Rabbi Yehuda does not allow a son to marry a woman who his father violated. Why not? My time at Rabbi Yehuda. Why does Rabbi Yehuda allow for a son to marry a woman that his father violated, but not for a son to marry a woman who his father violated? Did I say it the right way? Why is it, let's just ask more simply, why does Rabbi Yehuda say that a son is not allowed to marry a woman that his father violated? Says the Gemara, because of smuchim. Dichsiv, we're 12 lines from the bottom, give or take. Lo yikach ish es eshes aviv v'lo yigaleh knaf aviv. We see over here that in one pasuk, it says that a man is not allowed to marry his father's wife because he cannot be megale knaf aviv. And by marrying a woman that his father violated, knaf shira aviv lo yigaleh, he violates that. How do you know that that's talking about an anusa? Who says that pasuk is talking about an anusa? We're not talking about violating anybody. That they were married. It says Eishes Aviv. So it says the Gemara, because mi'ilu yadikra from a different pasuk that's right nearby. D'chsiv v'nosan ha'ish hashochev ima la'avi anara 50 kesef v'samech la lo yikach ish. The two psukim of anusa, of the case of raping, of violating a woman, and the case of lo yikach ish isha, of a man marrying his stepmother. So then, on those cases, that's samich, because there's smicha. We see that Rabbi Yehuda holds of smicha in Sefer Dvarim. Says the Gemara, and with this we're going to close. V'Rabbanan, if that's true that there's smicha in these two psukim, then why did the rabbis say that a son is allowed to marry a woman who a father violated? After all, it's megala knaf aviv. And we just saw that everybody holds of smuchim in Sefer Dvarim. And if these two psukim are in fact next to one another, the pasuk of an anusa and the pasuk of not marrying a stepmother are next to each other, how can the Rabbanan possibly say that a son is allowed to marry a woman who the father violated? It's megala knaf aviv, based on smuchim, exactly what we just said. So it says the Gemara, Ihava samich le'kedaga amris. You're right. Had these two psukim been next to each other, Rabbi Yehuda, I would agree with you. But you didn't pay attention. There's another pasuk in the middle. Says the Gemara, Hashta de lo samich le, and this time we read the parentheses. Dichsiv lo yikach ish es eshes aviv bentayim. That pasuk is bentayim in between. Therefore, we learn something different from these two. We learn b'shomeres yavam akasuv medaber. There, we're talking about a shomeres yavam. We'll discuss this in a moment. And that, what is that going to teach us? V'lav or alav b'shnei lavan. That teaches us that if a child marries or tries to marry or is intimate with his father's Yevama, okay, you got to do the math here. So you have a child. So let's say you have Shimon, and his father's name is Yaakov, and Yaakov's brother had a wife and died. So Yaakov's brother, let's just say Yitzchak. So Yitzchak's wife is now subject to Yibum to Yaakov. So in such a case, if the son marries that new wife, the old wife of Yitzchak, so then says the Gemara, there's two isurim. Isser number one is that he married his father's wife, and Isser number two is he married the Shomeres Yavam, the woman who was saved to be the Yavama. We're going to stop here, but just to summarize what we've gotten up to so far, we asked a question on the bottom of this page. Hey, wait 1 second. Why don't we employ the rules of asay dochelosa asay to say that a father taka should marry a daughter? We know the word aleha in the pasuk stops us from doing that, and the Gemara in a long-winded answer said that in regards to regular asay dochelosa asay, we learned that out from smuchim. We'll pick up on Shabbos from 4 lines from the bottom, and we will learn Daf Daled Amud Beis and Daf Hey. Wishing you all a beautiful night.